어제 광화문 집회 모습입니다. 가뜩이나 코로나 전파 위험이 높은 사랑제일교회 신도들이 참석했다고 해서 걱정이었는데
정부가 사랑제일교회 교인 방문자 명단 5,900여 건과 광복절 집회 참여자로 추정되는 사람들의 명단
지난 일주일 동안 신규 확진자의 절반가량이 사랑제일교회와 관련 있는 거는
교회발 감염이 확산되고 또 대면 예배를 강행하는 걸 두고 개신교 안에서도 자성의 목소리가 이어지고 있습니다. 개신교 내 10여 개 단체가 한국교회가 사회에 씻을 수 없는 죄를 지었다며 대면 예배를 중단하라는 성명을 냈습니다.
안녕하세요. KBS 뉴스 방송에 와주셔서 감사합니다. 제 이름은 양지영입니다.
저는 2020년 8월 15일 광화문 집회에 참석한 23살 대학생입니다. 미국에서 태어나 저는 해보고 싶은 공부도 다 해봤고 진학한 명문대학교에선 상위 1%로 졸업도 해봤고 그리도 원했던 미국 회사에 취직도 해본 세상적으로 봤을 땐 이 주어진 꽃길만 잘 걸어가면 되는 그런 인생이었습니다. 근데 지난 5월 저는 이 모든 것을 내려놓고 한국에 들어왔습니다. 매주 국회 앞에서 3시간씩 통역하는 것부터 전국을 돌아다니며 애국 강의와 청년 문화 사역을 하는 것, 그리고 코로나까지 감수하며 이번 8.15 광화문 집회에 참석한 것은 저의 조국 대한민국이 지금 위기에 처해 있기 때문입니다.
To the Korean press, media, and the vast majority of our nation's people, the August 15th protest was a rally by extreme right-wing conservatives, pseudo-heresy religious groups, and coronavirus-spreading criminals. But was it really so? Scapegoats of a larger political agenda and corrupt journalism, the tens of thousands of people that gathered in the August 15th rally were Korean citizens crying out for a reinvestigation of the April 15th electoral fraud, parents and medical professionals protesting against the passing of the Anti-Discrimination law, and finally, tens and hundreds of thousands of people, both local and overseas, resisting the strengthening of ties with the communist China and the consequent de-strengthening of ties with the United States of America. The August 15th rally was not a right-wing, ultra-conservative, pseudo-heretical religious movement. According to the government's official COVID-19 website, the number of confirmed cases increased sharply from August 14th, a day before the August 15th Gwanghwamun Rally. But if, as they report, the second mass wave of coronavirus was caused by the August 15th rally, there are several serious flaws to their sense of logic. According to Professor Chang-sup of Korea University Medical School and other key medical professionals in the nation, the incubation period of the Wuhan virus is up to 2 weeks, and the average incubation period officially recognized by the academic community is 5.2 days. So if, as reported by the government, the number of confirmed cases rapidly increased from August 14th, the causes of this increase sensibly should bracket between August 9th and July 30th. And furthermore, if infected by the August 15th rally, symptoms should reasonably arise not on the week of, as was reported by the government and public press, but instead on the weeks following, at earliest from August 20th. In other words, those that should be held liable for the rapid increase in confirmed cases starting from August 14th are not the attendees of the August 15th rally, but instead those that had already been infected from weeks before. So, what happened before August 15th? From February 2nd to April 1st, the currently pro-Chinese Korean government refused to restrict entry from Ground Zero, China, neglected the hundreds that were confirmed at a gay club in Itaewon, Seoul for weeks on the basis of LGBTQ rights, performed a large-scale funeral of the former Seoul mayor Park Won-soon in City Hall, and from July 31st to August 15th, created a temporary holiday to distribute vacation coupons, allowing hundreds of thousands of people to gather in public beaches like Haeundae and those of Jeju Island. A true leader listens to the cries of the people. But the rally of the nation's people on August 15th was a tragic event in which the nation's leader framed hundreds of thousands of people as mere coronavirus spreading criminals. Why is the government afraid? Not of the thousands that gathered at the beach, but of the thousands that gathered at the Gwanghwamun Square. What was the message of the people on August 15th? Perhaps it is this message that reveals the truth behind the closed doors of our nation's government and public journalism. What they fear first is election rigging. April 15th, 2020, the National Assembly election of the 21st Congress. Of the 43 million Korean voters, the result of Election Day votes on April 15th, in which 60% of total voters participated, was 124 seats for the United Future Party and 123 seats for the Democratic Party. Statistically, then, one can predict that the remaining 40% of total voters would show a similar voting trend. However, the result of early voting from April 10th to the 11th, in which the remaining 40% of total voters participated, was nowhere near its 60% counterpart. A mere 44 seats for the Future Integration Party and an unprecedented landslide of 204 seats for the Democratic Party. With the 40% early voters reversing the opposition party by a landslide, the total results of the 21st Congress election was a victory of the Democratic Party by 180 seats to 103. An outcome that, according to Professor Park Young-ah of physics at Myeongji University in Seoul, is statistically identical to throwing a coin 1,000 times and getting heads every single time. But more strangely, even before the early votes and Election Day votes were counted, various broadcasting stations and public media outlets aired a public prediction of 180 seats for the Democratic Party solely based on the exit survey that only the Election Day voters, who comprised 60% of the total votership, had received. Using an exit survey of the 60% of total voters that showed 124 to 123 voting trend to prophetically estimate the bizarre 44 to 204 voting trend of the remaining 40% of total voters, to perfectly predict 100% of the total outcome. The list goes on. More votes cast than the number of registered votes, ballots for Seocho-il precinct found in Bundang-il precinct. Had only the handwriting been different, but the name of the voting officer, Park Hwan-ok, fake sealed and fabricated as Park Chan-ok. The NEC's self-proclaimed sealing tape that leaves no damage to the ballot boxes when removed, but instead peels off as easily as would a typical Post-it note. Vote counting machines with 4 USB ports with at least one computer mouse connected to the back of each machine. Early vote ballots with uneven margins, seriously debilitating anti-counterfeiting measures. CCTV surveillance cameras not installed in early vote ballot storage areas despite voters' requests. And above all, the QR codes that were used from April 10th to the 11th for early election voting. Article 151, paragraph 6 of the Public Official Election Act clearly states that the serial number for printing election ballots must be marked in the form of a bar code, not a QR code. According to Richard DeMillo, a cybersecurity expert and chair of computer science at Georgia Institute of Technology, The QR code is not only an expensive and unnecessary function in the modern voting system, but is also seriously vulnerable to cyber attacks, as hackers can install malware on ballot marking devices and make undetectable changes to the code on the printed ballot. In her May 6 report, Early Votes, Digital Vote Counting Machines, and Digital Election Fraud Suspicions in South Korea, Dr. Tara Oh, founder of the EARC, reports that the counting machine operates by receiving instructions for sorting and calculating votes. These instructions can come directly from a QR code or be transmitted through a central server using a particular network. Both ways are equally capable of producing an entirely different outcome from the actual voting result. For early voting from April 10th to the 11th, all of the election equipment and 5G network installations were products of a Chinese company called Huawei. Already judged as a threat to cybersecurity and thus prohibited by Western governments such as the United States of America, Europe, and also India, Huawei is not only founded by a former communication officer of the People's Liberation Party of China, but is also, according to foreign experts, deeply connected with and closely managed by the Communist Party of China. Closely involved in the process of forcing minority groups such as the Uyghurs to install specific smartphone apps to detect and report all their activities to the government, Huawei is already known to be a close affiliate of the Chinese government. College students of Seoul National University, Korea University, and Yonsei University, college professors and teachers, the Black warriors of liberal democracy, and the hundreds of thousands of the nation's people that gathered in the Gwanghwamun Square this past August 15th. When the people of the country were crying out against a corrupt election, it was not the Korean government nor the Korean press that heard the people's cry. Instead, it was our foreign neighbors overseas. A renowned British current affairs magazine, The Economist, criticizing the suppression of freedom, expression, and speech by the current South Korean government. The International KCPAC 2020 conference held in Seoul, South Korea on August 25th to discuss allegations of the April 15th electoral fraud. And finally, U.S. news outlets that have begun to investigate and report on the April 15th election rigging. Electoral fraud is not an emotion-based conspiracy theory. Raising our voice against an electoral fraud backed up by countless pieces of evidence is our dutiful responsibility as citizens of the Republic of South Korea. However, the reason as to why hundreds of thousands of Koreans gathered in the Gwanghwamun Square does not stop at an electoral fraud. Committing an unjust election, by which now having taken over the government, the 21st Congress has proposed many legislations at an unprecedented rate, among which are the legalization of abortion and education of anal sex in elementary schools. Among such bills that the 21st Congress is trying to pass is the Comprehensive Anti-Discrimination Act. At first glance, the Anti-Discrimination Act appears as morally and politically correct. But if one actually takes the time to look through the bill's actual provisions, one can easily recognize that the bill is a direct opposition to liberal democracy, depriving the people of their freedom of speech, freedom of beliefs, and freedom of assembly. Article 2, paragraphs 2 and 3 of the Comprehensive Anti-Discrimination Act states that any negative evaluation or opposition to homosexuality is not only prohibited but also punishable. Any opposition to an unclassified third sex other than male and female is legally also punishable. Furthermore, as the bill includes both religion and belief systems, any opposition to pseudo-religious cults, extremist aspects of the Islamic religion, and communist socialist beliefs are to be prohibited and punished if violated. Even my remarks at the moment would be of enough reason for heavy fines and imprisonment. This is not an anti-discrimination law, but instead a reverse discrimination law. If the comprehensive anti-discrimination law is passed this year due to the ignorance and apathy of the majority of our nation's people, this is the type of society that you will have to pass down to your future generations. Homosexuality may first start off as love, but according to psychiatrists, researchers, and scientists, homosexuality ultimately boils down to sexual addiction. In 1978, the United States published a large study showing that homosexuality is sex addiction. The study surveyed the number of sexual partners among gay men in America. The results were shocking. Even without the technological means, such as computers, smartphones, and emails as we do now, 28% of male homosexuals had over 1,000 sex partners, and 43% had over 500. But now, living in the age of smartphones and emails, we can reasonably assume that this number is most likely to have doubled, 1,000 to 2,000 at minimum. One of the biggest reasons for which many Christians in South Korea are opposing the anti-discrimination law is the forced respect for a variety of sexual preferences and orientations. Sexual orientation, as referred to in the Comprehensive Anti-Discrimination Act, is not limited to homosexuality between people, but also introduces a lawful respect for sexual relations between humans and animals. This is an online advertisement that reads, "We decided to conduct group bestiality in Pyeongtaek on March 14th. Group bestiality refers to an act of renting out a place, releasing animals, and conducting horrid acts of collective fornication." In 1929, hundreds of thousands of people in Germany cried out that homosexuality is not a problem and passed the Comprehensive Anti-Discrimination Law. However, because of the criminal justice principle of the law, those that commit bestiality demanded their rights to practice their own sexual orientation and preferences, just like those of the LGBTQ community. And that same year, in 1929, bestiality was officially legalized. As soon as the law came into existence, there was a massive surge of legally created animal brothels all across the country. This is not a fictional make-believe story. This is a piece of real photography taken of a dog that died after working at one of these German animal brothels for 3 months. Not only has its anal genitals burst, but also its legs and ankles carry the brutal traces of the brothel users, tying them up to prevent the defensive aggression of these animals to protect their own bodies. Is this really love? Is it a sexual orientation that should be legally protected under our very own Constitution? If this anti-discrimination law is passed in our own country by the end of this year, this will be the future of our nation as well. Homosexuality does not end in homosexuality. In the United States of America, bestiality is illegal. In other words, homosexuality is legal, but sexual relations with animals are legally punishable. But what drove the illegalization of bestiality was a story that shocked the entire country and the entire world. Kenneth Pinion, a white gay man seeking greater homosexual pleasure, engages in receptive anal sex with a male horse and consequently ends up dying of peritonitis. This true story of Kenneth Pinion's death shocked the entire world. Realizing the close relationship between homosexuality and bestiality, the general public and media mobilized the U.S. prosecutors to track down all men practicing zoophilia, or bestiality. But what they found was not what they had expected. The majority of the men practicing zoophilia had been or currently were child molesting pedophiles. So at the end of the day, the bestial punishment law that exists in the United States of America today was created as a legal attempt to prevent sexual violence and molest against children. And through this one incident, American psychiatrists and the general public came to realize that there exists a significant correlation between homosexuality, bestiality, and pedophilia. pedophilia. But these same exact crimes are currently happening in our very own nation, the Republic of South Korea. This yellow advertisement leaflet is one of the many that are found in the populous streets of Seoul, the capital city of South Korea. It reads, "Looking for an SM sub, bottom sub." SM stands for sadist and masochist and refers to homosexuals that are satisfied not only with anal sex, but also that of which induces pain in the partner. Sub is an abbreviation for submission and refers to the idea of sexual labor. Bottom refers to the person who plays the role of a woman when men engage in anal sex. And TikTok 8780, they have not only revealed the means for contact, but also their personal identity. But what's even more shocking is the text written on the bottom right corner. Beginners possible, young persons possible. This gay man likewise is looking for someone young. But do you know where these clusters of yellow leaflets were found? On a power pole just 20 meters away from an elementary school. Even in our current society, in which the anti-discrimination law has not yet been passed, such leaflets are ubiquitously found near our own children's schools. If public support for this supposed LGBTQ-friendly anti-discrimination law continues, and if this law happens to pass this year, as many deem highly likely, even if a parent protests against these yellow leaflets and opposes those that practice such sexually abhorrent deeds against young children, it is not the user, TikTok 8780, but the parent that is discriminated against the sexual preference and orientation of TikTok 8780 that will be thrown behind prison bars. Another serious problem in South Korea is that homosexuality is taking place in the nation's military. These are screenshots of several posts found on a well-known gay website. It reads, "Anyone in Division 15 want to have anal sex?" These posts are distributed from beginner and deputy officers all the way to command officers and 3-star generals. Furthermore, for the past several years, an event called the Military Gay Sex Party has been co-hosted by 5 members of the South Korean Congress. And even more shocking, since 2017, proposals to abolish Article 92, Paragraph 6 of the Military Criminal Act, which bans anal sex between military soldiers, have been incessant up to this very year of 2020. Homosexuality is not genetic. Running a GWS high-technology genetics research technique to thoroughly investigate the entire human chromosome, there is no single genetic cause of same-sex sexual human behavior. This is an online news article by 동아일보 that features the story of how Hong Seok-chun, the most famous gay celebrity and gay activist in Korea, became a homosexual. This is a story that he himself shared at an open lecture with students at Seoul National University. When I was in the 4th grade of elementary school, I was sexually assaulted by an adult homosexual living in my village. I was afraid, and back then didn't know how to respond or to inform my parents. So I kept it to myself, and by my senior year of high school, 19 years of age, I had been sexually assaulted by more than 300 homosexual partners. Homosexuality is 100% acquired and learned behavior. In other words, the human brain triggers a learning of same-sex sexual behavior as a result of early homosexual contact, as in the case of Hong Seok-chun, or the watching of homosexual pornography. For the past 15 years, progressive educators have been instilling the biased views and the evidence-lacking claims of homosexual advocacy groups into our very own young children and adolescents, questioning these highly malleable children as to whether they're sure, they're positive of their sexual orientation, encouraging them to think twice about their sex, and most problematically, distorting research results to teach that homosexuality, that anal sex, does not cause HIV/AIDS. These educators argue that their education does not have a big impact on young children and adolescents, but students who yet lack a sense of critical thinking grow up as educated, as taught, without feeling much resistance to same-sex sexual behavior, and later, as experts show, fall into homosexuality and AIDS infection. Due to this culture of homosexual advocacy, over the past 15 years, the rate of AIDS in young adolescents in South Korea has exceeded 2,500%. This speaks out not only to the well-being of individual lives and families, but also more broadly to that of the country. All treatment costs for the AIDS virus caused by same-sex anal sex are supported 100% by the nation's tax. The medication pills that an AIDS patient takes for a month cost $6,000, of which the government covers 90% by the people's tax, and the patient covers the mere $600. But did you know that if the patient shows the $600 hospital receipt to the public health center, the $600 is refunded in cash immediately? This ultra coverage does not stop at the cost of these pills and medications. The high cost of checkups and various treatments at university hospitals, the employment cost of AIDS caregivers, which is typically twice or more the daily rate of general caregivers, the cost of food, side dishes, and other relief supplies shipped to these patients every month, and even the cost of round-trip flight tickets had a patient in Jeju Island wanted to receive medical examination at Seoul National University Hospital in Seoul every single month for the rest of their life. Due to such mismanagement, the social cost borne by the homosexual AIDS problem in South Korea finally exceeded $4 billion in the year of 2013, and if including the rise in inflation, exceeded $8 billion in the year of 2018. With this trend, the LGBTQ community of South Korea continues to address their status as sexual minorities with homosexual rights to insist that the government financially covers for all aspects of their life for a lifetime. Homosexuality is a matter of policy. In Uganda, Africa, where once 60% of the nation's people were infected with HIV/AIDS, the installation of Museveni as president brought about strict laws against homosexuality to save the country from perishing. And the percentage of AIDS patients today? A mere 4%. A good law not only saves a country, but also saves the individual. The Comprehensive Anti-Discrimination Act is rampantly misunderstood by the general public as a legislation supporting mutual respect, which is theorized by the left as critically absent, once again without any quantitative data among members of society. Homosexuality, even bestiality, as seen in the Bestiality Association of Korea website aforementioned, is not illegal in the Republic of Korea. Furthermore, the majority of the Korean population, quite unfortunately, is too invested in and of itself that it does not care enough to go about supporting or opposing the rights of various minorities, as evidenced in public polls and surveys. The political rhetoric of rampant discrimination against the LGBTQ community and various minorities in our society by the media must be put an end to. Proposed incessantly each and every term by the Democratic Party leadership, for the past 20-plus years, the Comprehensive Anti-Discrimination Act enforces a legal protection over homosexuality, bestiality, pedophilia, and even other sexual minorities such as mechanophilia, which is a sexual attraction to machines like cars and bikes, and necrophilia, a sexual attraction to dead bodies. If we remain ignorant consumers of public media and the greater political agenda that dictates the current zeitgeist, we will soon have no choice but to watch behind the bars of a debilitating military, decreasing birth rates, a falling economy, and an increase of government surveillance, a surging of socialist laws, and a strengthening of communist ties. We will lose liberal democracy, we will lose our freedom, and we will lose our country. I would like to address the many parents that verbally harassed the participants of the August 15th rally just because their child was off school for another 2 weeks. If you still do not realize that the tens and hundreds of thousands of people, from young children to the elderly, gathered at Gwanghwamun Square under the heavy rain and the risk of contracting COVID-19, was ultimately to protect your very own children and the future generation of South Korea, our country has no hope. And also the many Christians that profess to believe in God's sovereignty and yet sit behind their televisions and smartphones without doing anything. Captivated by the fear of this virus and ignorantly consuming the messages of a fear-instilling, media-controlling, authoritative government that chooses not to investigate subways and companies that are overflowing with hundreds and thousands of people every single day, but instead to selectively frame the organizations and institutions involved in the Gwanghwamun Assembly to better fit a larger political agenda of religious persecution, destruction of liberal democracy, and a smooth transition into a communist Korea. We need to wake up. The August 15th Gwanghwamun Rally was a movement by the people and for the people. It was a rally against the cutting-edge digital crime of the April 15th electoral fraud, the unbelievable growth rate of 2,500% of AIDS among Korean adolescents for the past 15 years as a consequence of leftist progressive education, and finally, the strengthening of ties with a communist China, which debilitates its people from any true freedom, and the consequent cutting of ties with the United States of America that birthed in this country the greatest blessing, liberal democracy. Ask yourself, who are the ones risking their lives to fight for you, your family, your children, and your country? Is it the current government leadership or the election-rigged 21st Congress? The Constitution of the Republic of South Korea, Article 1, Paragraph 2. The sovereignty of the Republic of South Korea rests with the people, and all power comes from the people. The August 15th rally was not a gathering of a specific religious, ultra-conservative group. It was a national convention that properly exercised the sovereignty due as citizens of the country for the country. What saves a nation is not the power of its leadership, but the sovereignty of its very own people.